Okay, Father, thank you again for bringing us back together this week to continue our study in Genesis. It's exciting because we're now seeing as your plan is unfolding in these sections of Scripture, what you've been doing through these men who you've chosen, so that you consider that you are the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we're at that point now in the story. It's pretty exciting. Lord, just help me to do an excellent job with this and help us to, again, see these Scriptures in a new light, in a fresh way. In your Son's name, amen. Okay. So let me make sure this is working. Nope, it's not. Jacob. Okay, now it's working. Great. Okay, great. So we're on the Toledot of Ishmael and Isaac, having wrapped up Abraham last week. I'm sorry the video is not up yet, but I'll record that this week. Hopefully get that up for you guys. So we're going to look at Ishmael and Isaac. Now, this is we're going to basically skip Ishmael in a couple of different ways because we will touch on him in this story a little bit later on, probably next week. But he is how God fulfills the promise to Abraham that he will be the father of nations, because Israel is what?
One nation.
One nation, right? Exactly right. So Ishmael and others will form out of it. And of course, the other part of it too is that when we get to Esau, Esau will be his own nation, etc., etc. We were covering that in the very beginning of the class. And so these things are just running themselves out. That's actually something we'll often take a look at. But you should be asking this question: what's wrong with the Toledot list now? This is something we've gone through a couple of times. Every time we get a class, we see something strange, we ask the question, what's wrong with it this time? How would you answer that question? Let's go back and show it to you. What's wrong with this list?
It's biblical, so there's nothing wrong with it.
It's perfect. Not
no
saying it's not
Abraham.
perfect. I'm just saying there's something.
You're perfect.
Anytime a pattern is broken, you should ask why is the pattern broken.
No Abraham.
I said, there's no Abraham.
That's exactly right. From here, from Terah, you would expect to see what? In between here, you'd say, where I'm the God of Abraham, right? Blah, blah, blah. He's missing. Why is he missing? I'll put it up there in case you're wondering.
The whole story is Abraham.
Yeah, I mean, it's all to
He's too
them. Yeah.
Okay.
It's all-
What would the Toledot of Abraham be about?
Abraham.
No.
His faithfulness to the Lord, yeah.
No.
No?
It would be about Isaac and
well.
Esau, or Isaac and Ishmael, right? That's what the Toledot would be about, right? What have we already heard about to this point? What do we already know about Isaac? If you forgot last week, you can take a look at your little pieces of paper here. When we did this. If you didn't get a copy of this, let me know. We got two up here still. Right? What was one of the major plot lines of Abraham?
He got circumcised when he was 90.
Yeah, that's
No, that was the most painful.
That's an
part.
interesting,
Oh.
interesting scene for sure, right?
Right.
It's one of the four on the bottom of the page.
Covenant?
Nope.
Besides Bradford.
Nope. Nope. Bottom of the page. It's one of the plot lines, not the episodes. Can't go in on this.
Quest for a son.
Yes! Exactly. What son would that be? That would be Isaac, right? This is why the Toledot's missing, because it is pulled into Abraham's life, because that defines Abraham. He comes to us as what? Old and childless, with a old and childless wife. And that's resolved in his Toledot, therefore, he doesn't get his own, because why? What else additionally would we learn about Isaac? We've already learned all the important things, because Isaac is just a plot point in what became of Terah. Sadly, Isaac remains a plot point in a lot of ways through the rest of the book of Genesis. So, what we know about Isaac, I came up with three things. He's obviously the subject of Abraham's life, therefore he's the subject of the Toledot of Terah. He is also the subject, to your point, he is the subject of the longest chapter in Genesis. Is what, again, we're in unit 11, which means Unit 10, which we did 3 weeks ago, right? Anyway, was the longest chapter. I know. I renamed all the videos, by the way, and I put
Good job.
notes on all of them. So anyway, we're in better shape from that perspective. But the idea is that Isaac is the subject of the longest chapter, and does he have any speaking parts in it? None. Isaac, that's none, right? And then of course he is a victim of all the forces that act upon him. He's basically sacrificial, offering for his father. He's a foil for his wife and a foil for his son. So unfortunately, Isaac, doesn't really rise to the level of Toledot, and Ishmael, of course, is way outside the line of promise. So, bringing all those things up, that's my conclusion for why we don't have a Toledot of Abraham. All right, so now we're going to do a couple readings. We'll start with Genesis 19 through 26. I'll have somebody read that for us, please. Because we get a very different structure in this Toledot than we did with Abraham's cycle. Okay, very, very different structure. So we're going to start by looking at the introductory parts. Somebody got the?
I got it.
Got it? Let it read.
Now these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac entreated Yahweh on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And Yahweh was moved by his entreaty. So Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is so, why then am I this way?" So she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And her days to give birth were fulfilled, and behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came forth red, all over like a hairy garment, and they called him Esau. Afterward his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to him.
All right, great. So, what do we learn about the characters here?
2 nations.
A couple of nations going to be born out of this, right?
One is stronger.
One of the nations will be stronger than the other. Okay. What other things?
Older will serve the younger.
Yeah, reversal of primogeniture. Yeah.
One's a redhead.
One's not just redheaded. One's apparently
Furry.
And hairy.
Yeah, one's basically described as almost like an animal, red animal, right? Huh?
Like Elmo.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll never look at this all the same way as you in my head. Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
gonna have to change my future pictures. Elmo, they're awesome. Other things we learned about them. Other things we learn about the characters.
They struggled.
They struggle, right, in the womb, and they're going to struggle.
Enough to make her appeal to God about it. I think that's interesting to me. That's an interesting point.
If they're doing
That's
that.
right.
It seems like, I mean, I guess I haven't talked to too many people who've carried twins or triplets or anything like that, but it seems like an interesting note to me to inquire about that.
It is. And again, this is the first time we were given a curse in Genesis that, through childbirth, etc., you can interpret a lot of different ways. It's going to be a difficult process. How many times have we heard about the process of birth so far in the book of Genesis since then? Or chapter 3? 0.
Yeah.
You get pregnant, you have a baby. That's the extent of it, right? They may not even talk about getting pregnant. They just have a baby, right? So skip to the end. Here, for the first time, we have what? An interwomb view of what's going on. Right? Other things.
Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born.
He is old, right? He's like he's not as old as his dad. He will nearly live as long as his dad, but he's not as old. But interestingly enough, they have to do what? How do they get the kid?
He prayed on behalf of his wife.
Exactly.
And I remember that Isaac was 40 when they married, so
They've been married almost 20 years without having a child.
Without a kid, right?
Mhm.
Now, they do a better job than, say, his dad.
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent, right? There's no extramarital kind of shenanigans running around in here or whatnot. But Yahweh doesn't have to show up and say, hey, you know what? You're well past childbearing age, so here comes a miracle. But there is this idea that it's the appeal to God on Isaac's behalf that unlocks, in a way of saying it, Rachel, and so she's able to, Rebecca, and she's able to have children. Well, I had come up with a handful of things, right? So again, I think one of the things is just the obvious, here comes the same story, right? Rebecca is childless like Sarah. Again, God has to act in order to restore that situation. Again, this is the first birth we hear anything about the pregnancy, even though we were told in chapter 3, you're going to know about pregnancy. Yahweh answers Isaac, but he speaks to Rebecca. I think this is also one of the interesting things. If you take a look at our Abraham thing, there's one of the plot points, which is, back to your point, the progressive nature of revelation. God is constantly talking with Abraham, right? Long dialogues with Abraham, right? Very interactive with Abraham, right? To this point, how many times has he spoken to Isaac? None. Again, this is entirely of Yahweh's making. There's no suggestion of failure on their part or sin on their part that leads to this unusual set of circumstances. God has chosen that she will carry twins and that these twins have unique destinies. Again, I think that's super important to understand.
Well, I think that's really true. To me, it shows how faithful they were as well. They had actually seen, well, they knew about what Abraham and Sarah went through. So they knew that the Lord was capable of doing anything.
Yeah.
So their faith in him, to me, that shows a strong character there.
No, I absolutely agree. I'm not saying, it's just interesting that he's just not getting the interaction.
Oh yeah, no, there's no interaction.
No interaction, right?
No.
But he does remember, I'm sure his mom and dad told him, he said, with the Lord, there's nothing impossible, right?
Exactly.
That would certainly be something that we'd cling to. Now, again, there are going to be the two nations as a result of the birth. And again, we got to remember that big part of this is to sit there and say that, well, let me back up, I'll make sure I didn't miss any of these notes, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I think before I leave this here, this is the thing I knew I was screwing on this deal, right? The twins are also a break in one other pattern. What have we seen since Genesis chapter 4 as far as the seed or the line of promise?
Well, it's the second son instead of the firstborn.
Well, it will be. We don't know that yet,
Wow.
per se, but in a sense that we get some sense that one will serve the older.
I don't know if we've ever seen twins before. Have we ever seen twins before?
No, we haven't seen twins before,
Yeah.
not that we've been explicitly told, right? And two, it's been pretty clear, one of the kids is the line of promise.
Right.
Right? We only had two other boys, two other brothers, Cain and Abel. You eliminate one of them pretty quickly in the story, right? So it's only Cain's line. Well, Cain's line's a loss, and so you have to do what? They restart the line with a different person, and it's traced one father to one son, one father to one son. We get past the table of nations, it's one father to one son, one father to one son. And we're at this point where now it looks like it could be a bifurcation of some sort, but it won't be. All right.
In all those cases, wasn't the first son always the line, and here is not?
Do we know that? I mean, these people are 600 years old still having kids. I don't know how, again, this is the thing, we don't know that any of the patriarchs ever had any girls until we run into Dinah at the end of this story. Right? They just aren't listed. So I have a hard time saying with certainty it's always the oldest. Because especially once you start with Abraham, it's never the oldest. It's always the somebody else.
Exception.
It's always the exception to the rule.
Seth wasn't the oldest.
Seth wasn't the oldest, no. Yeah. But he feels like he's the third in kind of how the story runs, which is obviously not the case, right? But it just feels like, oh, we were going to restart this whole deal, and Seth becomes the new line.
He becomes the new oldest.
Oh, I'm not saying he's the oldest in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, they were
But-
sure-
It's a miracle.
Yeah, but that's back to what Bob is saying. It's not necessarily ever the oldest. Well, I don't know that. Is Lamech, the father of Noah, the oldest of his family? I don't know that. Is Noah the oldest of his family? I don't know that. That's what I'm saying.
That's interesting, because, I mean, almost all your, we've been taught that always.
Culturally.
That culturally in tradition.
Yeah, we assume that.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. I would thought maybe you were saying that wasn't, because that's what we see as in tradition, that's what.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
I'm not,
okay.
but that.
No, I understand,
But I
yeah.
think that helps us to create the tension that we feel in the patriarch lives.
Yes.
Because that is absolutely gonna be turned on its head. In fact, that's the oracle
See,
that we have.
to me, that's just God showing his providence. I mean, showing
That's
who
his
he
choice.
is.
His
Yes.
choice will stand, as it says in
Absolutely.
Romans, right? Yeah, exactly. So that's where we're getting with this whole reversal of primogeniture, right? So we get down to the child receives names appropriate to character. Now, this gets more interesting in my mind from anything else, right? The Hebrew word for red, adbani, okay, is related to the word Edom. And of course, we are going to be introduced in this section to the fact that Esau is Edom, Esau lives in Seir, etc., etc. Now, we started with chapter 36 when we looked at this, right? And so we already know that in our class, but it should have been shocking to them to hear, as they're reading this story, that Esau is Edom, Esau lives in Seir, because for them, they'd have been like, whoa, time out on that, right? Because Edom will literally be a thorn in Israel's side the rest of their lives, okay? Now, again, this goes back to what's the point of the entire story of Genesis? It's a story of what? Origins. How did we show up, right? How did we end up being the chosen people? Why are there 12 tribes? Why aren't there 15? Why aren't there 6? Blah, blah, blah. You can answer a lot of different kind of questions. And then what's interesting is for them, they will answer these questions of, why are all these people pains in the butt around us? Okay, Edom, who else? Moab, who else? Ammon, who else? The Amalekites, who are going to be down further to the south, who they have to fight on their way out of Egypt.
I was saying the
All the
Egyptians, yeah.
Well, not just all the ites, because the Canaanites, of course, come from what? Ham, and they settled in that area. We've got that story a couple of times, right? But the Amalekites to the south are interesting because they're a combination of who? As far as I can tell, Esau and Ishmael. Because Esau will sit there and say, his parents are upset with him, I'm skipping ahead, but his parents are upset with him that he married what? Canaanite women. And he realizes this when his mom and dad tell Jacob, do not marry a Canaanite woman, go up to, where dad found a girl, sort of a deal. And Ishmael, because he's so spiritually blind, goes, oh, that's right, I should be marrying in the family. And then he goes off and marries what? An Ishmaelite, clever, clueless individual, right? And the Amalekites, I think, are kind of a combination of the lines of Esau and Ishmael. So again, all these relatives, these cousins and whatnot, just surround Israel and are always just kind of, sand in the gears.
Who are the Philistines from again?
Philistines were Canaanites, so they're straight up Canaanites from line of Ham. Sorry about that. So now the children get these appropriate names, right? So Edom is red, kind of like this. Hairy, Seir, sounds very similar to Seir. And again, the narrator, I think, knowing their destiny, chooses these words to capture Esau, right? He is not described as a cute baby. All right, no parent looking at this going, whoa, this is a very distinct difference between these two kiddos, right? Of course, Jacob's name, Yaakov, is selected because of its connection to the sound and sense of the noun for heel, akeb, and of course the verb akab means to watch from behind. And so again, all these things kind of fit in from that perspective. And then, of course, there will be conflict between these two. Conflict is going to be one of the major themes of this section of Scripture for us. We're going to look at themes next week. So now I need somebody to read the next introductory narrative, because we go from the narrative of their birth to now into the narrative of the birthright. So Genesis 25, 27 through 34.
I can do it.
Good.
When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear it to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright.
Yeah, interesting story, right?
For a bowl of soup.
For a bowl of red stuff.
It's Manhattan all over again.
Yeah, exactly. So, how is Esau described?
Hunter?
Hunter. What else?
Not real bright.
Dumb.
Not real bright.
Hungry?
Not real
He's
bright.
hungry,
Hungry.
yeah.
Yeah, he's a victim of his appetite in this case, right? So let's ask this question: how is Jacob described?
Shrewd.
Quiet.
Peaceful.
He can cook.
Quiet. How many people have that word quiet or mild in that very first description of Jacob?
Quiet.
Peaceful.
Uh,
What else? Okay, by the way, that's a terrible translation, I think, of that word. Somebody take a look at these 4 verses for us. Or actually 5, I can't count. So I've got 5 verses from Job. 1, 1, 1, 8, 2, 3, 8, 20, and 9, 20. Let's have some people just pick and read those. We're just going to bang through them real quick. We're not going to look at any context. Just want you to hear, hopefully, the same word again and again. Who's got 1, 1? Who's got 1, 8? 2, 3, 8, 20, 9, 20.
I got 1, 1.
1, 1. Okay, wait. Who's got 1, 8?
I can do it.
Who's got 2, 3?
I do.
Got it. 9, 8, 20?
Again.
9, 20.
I got it.
All right, great. All right, now, everybody got their little fingers ready to go? Go 1, 1, please.
There was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of perfect integrity who feared God and turned away from evil.
Okay, great. 1, 8.
And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? And there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who God fears and turns away from evil." Who fears God? Whoops!
Changes the story. I was going to say we're not going to make any commentary on it. Now we have to. 2, 3.
Okay, it's back the same thing. And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil."
8,
And
20.
he's,
Yeah, 8, 20.
Behold,
But
God
no,
will
it's-
not reject a blameless man, or take the hand of evildoers.
9, 20.
Though I am righteous, my mouth will condemn me. Though I am guiltless, he will declare me guilty.
Okay, great. So what are you hearing in there? It's the same word.
Right?
blameless.
Blameless, right? Or another way of describing it would be innocent, right? That's the word tam. That is the word that we translate in ours as peaceful or quiet. Jacob is not described as peaceful or quiet. He may be, okay? But the word tam there means what? He's innocent. Now, that is striking to me, right? Because again, you get this follow on to it. Jeremiah 17:19, this is the word. The heart is treacherous, right? This is quoted in the New Testament, right? It's a kav halev. Halev is the heart portion. A kav means what? Treacherous. Look at Jacob's name. It's got the root in it, right? And again, there's the irony of this situation. You've got literally Esau, who sees in his brother's name the etymological signature of what he's known for. He's a treacherous dude. He's described as innocent, right? The Hebrew of his name could basically be construed as he will deceive.
Yeah, I've got down here, he deceives.
Yeah. Now, is this stealing of the birthright what we call it, the stealing of the birthright? Did he steal
Not
it?
really, no.
No. He did what?
Bought it.
He bought it. Took advantage of his stupid brother, right? Which is what all brothers are supposed to do. Okay?
I disagree.
But when we see, I will say, this language part definitely doesn't fit, because when we see in business, someone takes advantage of a situation, Like during this hurricane, when they were selling fuel for $15 a gallon kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Completely bad person doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's our perception of it, right?
Because that's kind of how I see this.
That's
The
right.
guy was in need, he wasn't bright, and his brother saw the opportunity.
Yeah, we would describe Jacob in this situation as basically what? He is very shrewd in his
Yeah.
calculation, right?
Good businessman. Yeah.
Very strong,
No,
yeah.
not
Well, he is very business-like,
Yes.
right?
And God is shrewd through him, right? So the argument of, well, if people do this and I charge you $15 a gallon for fuel, that's bad. But God gets to do things in ways that for him are perfect.
Exactly. The outcome, exactly. And again, to a large extent, because he can sit there in front of Satan and say something about Job, which is to say, this is a perfect man. He's blameless and upright before me. And of course, God knows what about Job. Is he perfect and blameless,
No, he's
upright
not.
before God? No, absolutely not, right? And yet he still uses these imperfect things to demonstrate what? His perfect nature.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's hard to wrap our heads around, right? Again, the other thing that we see with Jacob is he is intensely what? Self-interested, self-focused. Okay? Now, again, I want you to keep in mind this idea that he is described as what? Innocent. Which, to your point, Scott, means when we look at Jacob, there's a lot of moral ambiguity surrounding this dude, right? And in fact, that is going to be one of the themes that we should be carrying with us as well, okay? So, let's look at this from this perspective. Who does Isaac prefer?
Esau,
Esau, right? Why?
because he eats of his game.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a man's man.
Yeah, that's right.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
Because why?
He's a man's man.
He's a man's man, I think so, right? And of course, Isaac is described as a man's man, right? No.
No.
When we last saw him, he was hanging around what?
His mother's tent.
His mother's tent. When he meets Rebecca, where is he still hanging around? His mother's tent. He begins and ends that story around he's a mama's boy.
He's in mom's basement.
His mom's basement? Yeah.
At 37 years old.
40-year-old dude living with his mother in her basement. He's not a man's man, right? I get it, from what he's been through to a large extent, it's gonna be somewhat difficult to live with that, right? Now again, the problem with this is that again, it's almost satirical that it's thrown out that way. I mean, Isaac likes him because he does what? He gratifies a need or a desire or a want in his life. Rebecca, of course, is what? Who does she love? Jacob. Why?
He helps with the cooking.
That's tremendous.
He doesn't cause trouble. He's just one of
mama's
those
boy.
guys that just is there. He just.
Okay, reread that section. Why does it say Rebecca loves him?
He's in the tent all the time.
What does it say that?
Yeah, it says he's dwelling in tent, he was a quiet man dwelling in tent.
Doesn't mean he was dwelling with his mom.
No, but he was like, he didn't go out in the field.
He was home.
He was a homeboy.
He's a homeboy, right?
wasn't.
Yeah.
He didn't go.
So he's a
He
mom.
showed her attention and his brother didn't.
Again, you guys are reading so much in this. People watch too many 50s rerun shows, right? What does it say?
Well, she knew.
No, I got a hand up in the back here. I'm gonna
Okay.
let her rip. Here comes Ryrie.
Yeah, it's not right, it's Klingler. Klingler's view, and this is later when, this is later when he says that the promise to the man is also the promise to the wife. And God told Rebecca that the older would serve the younger. And so she knew that Jacob was the seed. And so she favored him because she knew that he was the one that was to carry
Interesting.
the
Exactly.
promise.
One of the things that makes you, as you read through this, to read into it, is to sit there and say, again, Isaac prays, Rebecca hears the story. How much of it does she share with Isaac? How much does Isaac retain of what she shares with him, right? Because there's no way, if Isaac is fully aware of what the oracle is between the two boys, that he would ever give the blessing to the
Yeah.
firstborn. And yet that's the scene that was set up for us, right? Of course, Isaac doesn't seem to be aware of the fact that there's been a little transaction going on here over a bowl of red stuff, right? And so it's interesting from that perspective. But as I read through this, you guys can read into this as well, but the scripture literally does not sit there and say that she has any preference for Jacob based on anything other than just her maternal love. I think the intent of this is to do what? It sort of brings us into this kind of a conflict, right? That she loves Jacob for Jacob. And it may be because of what she has wrapped into him. You know, he's a figure of some sort in this long line of figures that God is going to be using to bring about his salvation to the world, etc. But she doesn't love him because he cooks. She doesn't love him because he stays in the tent. She doesn't love him because he's a quiet person. She loves him, is what the text says. Very different. And again, in a family that's very self-serving, she's unique from that perspective. Right?
Thomas, I just, as an aside, it's interesting that the red man loves the red stuff. He's the man of the world and he likes the stuff of the world.
We're going to get there in just a bit, right?
No.
So here's something, again, we talk about, we're going to look at a series of conflicts because conflict is also going to be one of the major themes in this section of Scripture. It begins at the beginning, goes all the way to the end, conflicts. But there are conflicts between Esau and Jacob, and there are conflicts between Isaac and Rebekah. And again, we're being introduced to them right here. Because again, these two, all four of these people are going to play a role in a story that's just, hard to believe, right? So, this theme of conflict will be major for us in this deal. Now, we continue with this, right? Esau's betrayal is, to your point, pretty grotesque. He's basically born as a little hairy animal, right? All covered in red. He likes the red stuff, right? He is all inarticulate appetite. The biblical Hebrew does not incorporate specifically speech patterns like dialect, deviations, bad grammar. I'm talking quietly, I'm shouting from the mountaintop, blah, blah, blah. We get those kinds of things in our fictional accounts. Think about Huckleberry Finn. You couldn't read Jim's language unless you were from the South because you couldn't figure out what the heck he was saying, right? Mm-hmm. Or Kamala Harris when she's doing some recent Trump, stump speech, picking whatever dialect she wants to use, right? Mm-hmm. These things we're aware of in our grammar and our storytelling, but biblical Hebrew doesn't give us those sense of clues and things like this, right? So here instead, I think we get this important use of verbs. Because Esau asks for the stew with a verb used for feeding animals. Is that interesting? Because he's basically what?
Animal.
Feed me, I've got animal appetites, right? One translator put it as, let me cram my maw. He is all inarticulate appetite. He can't even think of the word for stew, but merely points at it. You can imagine grunting and going, hey, this red stuff. Right? Just give me this red stuff. Now, interesting enough, we get verbatim repetition here. We are told he wants it because he is what? Exhausted and starving, etc., right? And then he goes off and says what? I need this because I am exhausted and starving, right? We get the second repetition where he goes off and adds the hyperbole. If I don't eat now, I'm going to die. That comes a little bit later, right? But again, he is caught in the pangs of hunger and exhaustion, and he's got what in his nostrils?
Food
Smells. Boy, that smells good, right? And we do this too, right? We're driving down the road, and we're like, oh man, somebody's making burgers. Somebody's cooking bacon, right? I mean, these things just drive me nuts, And so,
how often does a older brother not dominate a younger brother and take what he wants?
Well, again, there's no explanations. They're twins. Alex, you want to set that up?
Whole lesson,
What
man.
if he was starving, he might not have been strong at the moment.
May not have been, right? He certainly feels himself weak and famished, etc., right? So from that perspective. Now what's interesting to me is, of course, Jacob comes along, very calculating. Again, he's got some idea. He has in some mind some legal form of how this is going to go off and work, right? Swear to me. He basically repeats it, right? He's thinking in terms of this, and then of course his focus is on what? He's thinking about the future. Esau is thinking about the what?
For here and now.
The here and now. These things will also be very important themes that we will see through the rest of this Toledot, right?
This is so interesting, because I mean, I'm just saying, my brother has 5 boys.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just seeing this played out totally in my mind with things that are going. He's got one that is a genius with finance and everything else, and he was taking his brothers to the cleaners all the time. I mean, because he knew what to do. You know,
Yeah.
it is just, I had never thought of it this way before. But now I'm sitting there watching all this play out in my mind as,
Yeah.
as if it could be real.
It is real, and this is what I'm saying. This is the genius of the economy of biblical narrative, right? We don't necessarily consciously recognize this,
Yeah.
right? But we read through the story and we're left with, hey, this is how these two people work out, right? What I'm saying is what's interesting is in this little compact 2 opening, we'll get into the bigger picture here next, in this little compact opening of this Toledot, all the major characters and their characteristics are on full display. And it begins at the beginning. I love it. I mean, it's really, really well written from this perspective, right? So, moving on, okay, we have this transaction is completed, right? And then Esau's character is again demonstrated. His actions are always, his character is always demonstrated through his what? His actions, generally speaking, right? This is amazing, because what we get at the end of the deal is what? This rapid chain of verbs. And he ate, and he drank, and he rose, and he went off. That's the end of the story, right? Just bang, 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 bang. Don't need him to say anything, because why? Actions are louder than words, right? That's that old saw that we use, right? And again, it's this chain of verbs that is the proof that Esau does what? Despises his birthright. It's not that he sold it for a thing of stew, it's just that he's what? He is a
He didn't care about it.
creature of the moment, doesn't care about it, right? But that's tomorrow. I don't need to worry about tomorrow, right?
But
Don't you
here
think it's
is-
even more than that though, because he despised it because he didn't want that responsibility. Like, to him, this is a great deal.
Again, I
because-
think that's reading into the text.
No, it's thus, he despised,
Thus, after he's done what?
right.
This section of
But
these.
that's
these
the reason, the reason Moses is saying he did this is because he didn't want it in the first place.
No, you're right. He doesn't value it
Yeah.
in any way,
So
shape, or
to
form.
him, it's
But-
a great deal. He gets a bowl of porridge for something that he thinks is a negative.
Exactly, and I will agree with you that if I don't value something, and then you can sit there and say, I don't want it, right? This is why I give you what I'm going to give you in the White Elephant gift exchange, right?
Yeah, but the text
but
is
that-
pretty
but-
clear that it says he said he
And
was
the-
starving. It doesn't say anything about he was despising it until after he does it.
Until
That
after this.
shows that he did.
Exactly right. It's his actions that show it. It's not the exchange. That's what's interesting. The verb doesn't, or is the character, who again is omniscient. We'll talk about the narrator next week. The narrator knows all, but again, he doesn't sit there and say, thus he despised it because he traded it for a bowl of soup.
He gave it no value. is
He
what
gives it no
really-
value, and this is why. Again, he's got what? He's got no eye to the future.
Well, not just that, but he had to hear from his parents.
You hope so.
Yeah, well, certainly from Rebecca, from what you said.
Well, no,
She
that's what I'm saying. I
cares.
don't know. I don't know that Rebecca shared. You know, that's the thing, because why is Isaac then going off and giving a blessing to Esau, who, according to God's oracle, shouldn't get the blessing,
Right,
should
but
be younger?
they know the story. They know what their grandfather is all about. They know that Yahweh appeared to them. They know the miraculous birth of their father. They know all of this stuff.
You assume so. I
I
assume
think
so
so,
as
yeah.
well. Yeah. But again, how much is it in their consciousness on a minute to minute, day
Well,
by
I
day
don't think
basis?
it's in Esau's consciousness.
Clearly not in Esau's consciousness.
Yeah.
You were gonna say something.
So does Esau openly declare that he has sold his birthright for a bowl of whatever? Because it seems like right here you have these two brothers that are there together. They're isolated. There's nobody else there.
Yeah,
I know.
he said, you said. He said,
Who's there
right.
to enforce this, right? So somewhere along the way, Esau has to be dumb enough to go, yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
I did it.
We both, yeah. We
so
both,
what?
Yeah, you're right, which I think sets up what happens later. Because even though Jacob has what? Now he's got God's oracle, and he's got quote unquote a legal right to the birthright because of this transaction, they still have to go through what? This deception,
Tricking Isaac.
tricking Isaac to go off and make it real. So yeah, there's a lot going on here.
I always took them as two separate things.
Yeah.
Because the blessing is different than the birthright.
But they more or less go hand in hand. I mean, because again, this is, we'll see this in Genesis 49 and 50, right? That there's a double blessing that goes to the child who's the top of the food chain, right? Joseph gets that double blessing, okay? Judah gets the blessing of the Messiah. The big difference, right? But the idea here that, again, when you sit there and see what happens in the story, Esau comes and he sits there and says to his father, what? You have no blessing for me at all? And Isaac's response is no. I gave it all to your brother. I mean, that's what's at stake here. And this is to your point. This is why, again, he runs on, he just eats, drinks, gets up and leaves, right? Sort of a deal, is to sit there and say, he's like no regret. He's got no regret that he's given away his birthright.
Yeah, he didn't think.
That's the real issue. It's
Yeah,
not
he
that-
didn't think it through. I mean, he was living in the moment, and and probably in his mind that wasn't going to come to pass anyway.
Yeah,
It was his
exactly.
younger brother, Dodo.
Yeah, whatever.
He believed it.
I'll say whatever I need to say
Yeah.
to get some food in my mouth.
Exactly.
Right. But again, this is the thing. I think the point here, again, going back to this, right? It's what he literally, the transaction is meaningless to him.
Yes.
He could have
It
crossed his
is-
fingers.
It is interesting to me too that, it says here, and thus he despised his birthright, but he very clearly cares about the blessing. Like
He
that
will.
story, he's very, so that's kind of an interesting note there, at least to me.
My guess is his dad was like, "You are stupid," and embarrassed, and is like, "Okay, I have to get the money."
Maybe,
Could
right?
be, yeah.
But we'll burn that bridge when we get to there. So, moving on. We're still on.
Literally burn it. Yeah.
So what are some of the conclusions that we draw from this little section? Well, I think the first one is this one, and again, I think George is picking up on this, right? Esau is not spiritually fit to be the heir of Abraham's promises. So to connect to the larger narrative, and again, I don't know how much they are connected to that, okay? I really don't. But again, from our perspective as we read it, this is the whole point, right? Abraham's promises are the big deal. Everything is changed in chapter 12 when God shows up and promises Abraham. Again, he is way, way, way too much a slave of the moment. He's just no future considerations whatsoever. And again, he is way, way too much in thrall of his own physical needs. Now, from that perspective, this is not a person who is then doing what? How do I make this future reality true? How do I take myself from here to where I'm supposed to go off and go, right? And again, the ways and whys of his selling his birthright are offered as this proof that he's not worthy to retain it, because he won't. I mean, again, it will go through this conniving story, but nonetheless, he does not end up with the blessing. Jacob is a man who thinks about his future. I mean, and this is definitely one of the themes that runs through this section as well, right? He makes prudent stipulations in legal or quasi-legal terms. The word stone shows up all the time in this section. Why? Because Jacob is always building memorials to some agreement. Some agreement he has in his mind with somebody or something, right? And so Jacob always works in these terms. And again, he is a better bearer of the birthright because, again, historical destiny does not just happen. You got to make it happen, brother. And that's how Jacob sees these things, right? Now, again, I will make some arguments over here that we can sit there and say, well, that doesn't seem right because God has said it's going to happen regardless of you, right? At the same time, God has said it's got to happen through you. So get on board with the plan. And we go, remember when we went back to the paradigm of the shepherd and the farmer, right? There is this difference of just somebody who's being very passive about something and maybe following all the rules, that God is like, no, I'm much more interested in this person over here who's kind of reckless and living by extreme faith in some way, shape, or form. I think God already has a passion for Jacob, because Jacob's somebody who's going to go off and do what? Wrestle him.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
he shows responsibility. I mean, that's our whole point. Man is responsible. I
Yeah.
mean, God, he has a plan, and we're on that path. But
Exactly.
yet we have a responsibility
Exactly right.
in that plan.
So that brings us then to this question. is Jacob, if just out of these two chunks of scripture, these little bitty introductions, is Jacob the more appealing character between he and Esau?
From a godly perspective, or?
No, just as a reader. You're just,
No.
you're listening to this.
Well, yeah, cause Esau's an idiot now.
Yeah, cause you
Yeah,
see,
now that's the thing, right? We're used to, like, I'm gonna pick on the Western theme in a movie, right? You have a very good guy and you have a very bad guy. We all agree Esau's the bad guy, right? He's the guy in black, he's the idiot, he's the slovenly character and whatnot. Where do you put Jacob then?
Just a little.
Yeah, see, I've never seen him as a good guy.
One is a white collar criminal.
The other's the blue collar.
So he's Martha Stewart, is what I'm hearing. He's gonna take advantage of insider trading. So we got Noah and Martha Stewart now. Unbelievable, right? Yeah. Again, we get this thing, right? This contrast between the miserably famished Esau and the shrewdly businesslike Jacob, not entirely to his favor, right? And again, there's this thing, what hangs over me in this section is this declaration by the narrator, who's omniscient, that he's innocent. Again, that's a hard thing, that's just one more thing that's sand in my gears as I read through this section of scripture, right? Moral ambiguity will absolutely be one of the themes that we have through here. So our themes for Jacob that we're gonna go off and explore, again, his life is nothing but conflict. He is a treacherous individual, right? There's a lot of moral ambiguity to his actions. He always has an eye on the future. He is unfortunately a victim of talionic justice. What does that mean? There's another term that you could use, symmetrical poetic justice. What is poetic justice? You cut somebody off driving down the highway and then you are in turn cut off. Talionic justice, symmetrical poetic justice. We'll see this talionic justice appear again and again and again. Now, I handed out the handouts because I want to go off and take a look at a couple of things here. Of all the chapters that are related to Isaac, it's literally this one right here, 26. That's it. Everything else is about what? Jacob and Esau, which is what you would expect in the Toledo of Isaac, right? So we're going to look at that one in just a minute, but I want to go off and begin with this deception of his father. Jacob's narrative from that point forward is just a constant movement of plot and action. So when we get to him deceiving Isaac and we move further down, it's just this uninterrupted pile of stuff. He literally goes from he's deceived his father, he flees, he meets Yahweh, he gets to Haran, he marries Leah, he marries Rachel, he continues to work for Laban. He has 11 sons. He flees Laban. He encounters Esau. He encounters God, Diana and Shechem. He's then forced back to Bethel, and the story finally ends. It's just this uninterrupted, constant movement of plot and action. Did we have that with Abraham? No. His periods were a lot more distinct, right? There's a 13-year gap, and God said blah, blah, blah. Ishmael comes out, and then it's like, what? Well, I'll check back with you in a bit. We'll let you stew on this for a while, right? There's these stories that run to their conclusion, right? Lot's story, which is a part that's woven into this thing, runs to its natural conclusion, and it's just left alone, and we continue with other things, right? So this Abraham's life represents this very much more episodic kind of elements to it. The elements, the themes that we looked at kind of cross it and help us understand those things. But in this case, it is like literally one soap opera plot line for the entire season. Does that make sense? Very, very different from that perspective. Now, I would also sit there and say the big picture is slightly chiastic. And again, a chiasm is where something looks like this, right? Where you have the parallel plot points, you have something that represents the middle, and then you work your way back out. So when I say chiasm, it's a reference to the fact that the letter X is chi in Greek, and so you just follow the plot points in and follow back out. Here's the nearly chiastic component of it. Jacob, of course, is going to flee from the threat of his brother Esau. He encounters who next? God. He then moves toward his uncle Laban. He works for Laban, receives Leah and Rachel. He has 11 sons. He works for himself under Laban and receives wealth. He moves away from Laban. He encounters who next? God. And then he treats Esau as a threat. And that's the end of the story. Does that not sound chiastic to you? Where those things are, you see the parallels on either end of that theme? What's left in the middle?
The birth of the son.
The birth of the 11 sons. Who's hearing this story for the first time? The Israelites. But the whole point of the story is what? It's an origin story. What's more important from their perspective? When do I show up?
Yeah.
Right? We're all like that. You're watching a video of a wedding, what are you looking for?
Where you are.
You, right? How did my hair look, right?
So from a narrative structure, when did Moses write Genesis? Was it
I'm
in
assuming-
Moab while he's looking across the Jordan?
It could be, I'm thinking he could have written it during the 40 years of wandering. They get to Kadesh Barnea, everything falls apart, and then he's like, all right.
But certainly Deuteronomy is written with this backstory.
Yes, it is. Exactly right. So from my perspective, this is the whole point of this section is this becomes, in this deal, again, it's for us, it's kind of a throwaway chunk because it's like 11 kids, I can't even name them all, right? Sort of a deal. And yet that's the point of this because it's the origin of the nation of Israel. From this perspective, this is all 12 of these kids, right? And then you end up with these conclusions. Now, of course, what's interesting about this is and let's go back to what we talked about. If we have this possible, very, very, possible bifurcation between twins, Isaac and Jacob, our first twins that we've had in the line of promise that we're aware of, then by the time we get to here, and then of course when you add in Joseph and then Benjamin being the 12th that comes later, in a bit of, unfortunately, Talianic justice down here later, what you get then is which of the one is going to be the seed, because again, seed is plural and singular depending on context, and all along the way it's been what? Singular, singular, singular. We got to maybe plural with Esau and Jacob, but now we got 12 sons, which one is the seed? Because together they represent the seed. But one of them is the seed, singular. And of course we know it's Judah, right? So again, this is what will set us up for what comes next in the narrative of what became with Jacob. So, in our last 2 minutes, crap. Genesis 26.
Delete that.
You can take a look at this. And go through this. But again, the important part of Genesis 26 is there's a reality situation. Abraham is dead and gone. What does that mean? I'm the God of Abraham, right? Well, he's dead. So what good is that to me, right? Sort of deal. So what happens to the promises and the blessings? Well, what's interesting is if you look at chapter 26, so the use of the word Yahweh, we see it all throughout Abraham's cycle. And again, like I said, we saw in the material we did last week, he interacts with Abraham all the time. How many times does God interact with Isaac in this chunk of scripture? 2 times. All of them happening in chapter 26. That's it, right? He doesn't get the full-blown covenant sort of deal that Abraham got. He just gets, hey, I told your dad, so this is going to be good enough for you, sort of deal, right? And but what's interesting, if you go through 26, actually you see more parallels than you might have thought. Yahweh obviously appears, commands, and promises to Abraham, but he also does so to Isaac. Mistakes are made. Abraham certainly made those mistakes. We saw this battle between expediency and faith with Abraham. Isaac makes minor mistakes, at least in chapter 26. But again, still the blessings are received. So Abraham receives his blessing. Isaac gets his blessing here. They're involved in strife. Abraham's strife is quite large. That's obviously the conflict that he has with Lot, the conflict he has because of Lot, etc., etc. Isaac, conflict with Abimelech's people. He is reassured and he worships Yahweh. Abraham does that, so does Isaac. And he is acknowledged by the nations surrounding him. Abraham received that, so does Isaac. So a lot of these parallels, these keystones or foundation stones in their life are certainly there, but there's even one more that I think is important for all of the rest of us, because again, the book isn't just about these characters, it's about everything that follows afterward. And the last motif is this one, I am with you. He hears that specifically from God, right? Recorded in 26:3 and 26:24. And it appears in Abimelech's acknowledgement of Isaiah in 26:28, as it had featured in Abimelech's acknowledgement of Abraham in 21:22. This motif will continue for Jacob and indeed for all who are part of the promises of Abraham. What have we heard from Jesus at the very end? Behold, I am
With you always.
with you always. That motif continues for us because we are wrapped up into these same promises. Okay. So with that, next week, focus on the rest of these back chapters. We're going to look at predominantly 26:34 through the end, and we're going to explore these themes that I laid out here. So look for those themes and start filling in some blanks, and then we'll pick it up from there. All right? Thank you, guys.
I like how they both claim to be married.
Married to sisters?
Yeah.
Who?
Gotta be awful.
She's a cousin.